The sky over the modern city splits open with a crack of violet lightning. Out of the swirling rift, a single figure descends onto the asphalt with a heavy thud. Sang-hyuk stands up slowly, the dust from the impact swirling around his red cloak. He adjusts the porcelain mask on his face, looking at the familiar yet strange skyline of Seoul. 22 years in the hellish world of Eternal World has changed him into a god of war. Suddenly, a low growl vibrates through the buildings as a level 150 drain monster emerges from the shadows. Sang-hyuk doesn't flinch as the massive creature towers over him, its jaws dripping with slime. The monster lunges forward, its massive claws tearing through the concrete like paper. In a flash of purple light, Sang-hyuk reaches into thin air and pulls out a massive legendary hammer. He swings the weapon with a single hand, meeting the monster's strike with overwhelming force. The drain monster's head explodes into a shower of black ichor upon contact. He flicks the blood off his weapon and stores it back into his invisible inventory. "Now let's see if my brother is still where I left him," he whispers to himself. He walks through the lobby of an old building, the memories of his past life flooding back. He stands before door 504, his gloved hand hovering over the doorbell for a long moment. The door swings open to reveal Sung-min, looking older but with the same kind eyes.
"Brother? Is it really you?" Sung-min asks, his voice trembling with disbelief.
Sang-hyuk removes his mask for the first time, offering a rare, small smile to his only family. They sit in the small living room as Sang-hyuk listens to how Earth has changed into a game-like reality. Sung-min explains that most players who returned are only around level 20 or 30. The strongest known player in the world is currently Richard Poulsen at level 228, Sung-min notes. Sang-hyuk scoffs at the number, knowing he reached the max level of 300 years ago. He reaches into his dimensional storage and pulls out a pair of glowing S-rank dual swords. Sung-min gasps as the weapons illuminate the entire room with a fierce magical aura. "Take these, Sung-min. You won't be a weak player anymore," Sang-hyuk says firmly. Sung-min admits he is currently a member of the Baal Guild, which he thinks is helping people. Sang-hyuk's eyes ignite with cold rage at the mention of that corrupt name. "The Baal Guild is nothing but trash that preys on the weak," he growls. He orders his brother to quit the guild immediately, promising to show him true power. The next morning, Sang-hyuk heads to the Player Management Bureau to officially register. He watches as other players walk around with low-quality Earth-made equipment. He keeps his mask hidden in his coat, blending in as a low-level mercenary for now. His first goal is to find an old ally, the legendary blacksmith Lee Chul-woo. He pushes past the guards and receptionists of the massive workshop, ignoring their shouts. He bursts into the basement forge, where the heat is intense and the sound of hammers fills the air. "Chul-woo, you've grown quite successful on Earth," Sang-hyuk calls out loudly. The massive blacksmith drops his hammer in terror as he recognizes the voice of the Monarch. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sang-hyuk teases, leaning against a work table. He reveals a bag of S-rank ores from his inventory, tossing them onto the anvil. "I need a new mask, Chul-woo, one that can handle the power of a god," he commands. Suddenly, Sang-hyuk senses tingle as he detects multiple presences following him. A group of Baal Guild assassins emerges from the steam, weapons drawn. Sang-hyuk doesn't even reach for a weapon, simply staring them down with cold eyes. "You pieces of trash really don't know who you're dealing with," he whispers. Far away in a hidden chamber, the Demon King Baal's eyes snap open as he senses a familiar soul. Sang-hyuk stood before the imposing gates of the National Museum, which had been transformed into a den of demons. His brother Sung-min trembled beside him as the thick, sweet scent of the night witch's pollen filled the air. Sang-hyuk activated his invisibility cloak, pulling his brother into the shimmering veil of the legendary item. They slipped past the guards, who were nothing more than low-level players unaware of the predator in their midst. As they entered the inner sanctum, a swarm of succubus sisters descended from the vaulted ceilings. Sang-hyuk didn't flinch as the creatures attempted to weave a web of mental illusions around them. With a single motion, he slapped Sung-min back to reality, breaking the charm with brute force. A sudden explosion rocked the hallway as a small, fast silhouette tore through the stonework. It was Lilith, the succubus queen, though she appeared in a far smaller and more vulnerable form than he remembered. She lunged with terrifying speed, her claws glowing with a lethal dark mana. Sang-hyuk parried the strike with his legendary blade, the impact sending sparks flying across the dark corridor. He moved like a ghost, appearing behind the childlike queen and pinning her to the floor. "Sign the contract, or your soul will be extinguished," he whispered with a chilling calm. Lilith looked into his eyes and saw the depth of his max-level power, her defiance crumbling instantly. A golden scroll materialized, and the demon princess left her signature in glowing violet ink. The castle's mana shifted, acknowledging Sang-hyuk as the new master of the citadel. Days later, the citadel was transformed into a bustling hub of commerce and military preparation. Sang-hyuk summoned the world's most influential guild masters to a secret banquet. The air in the room was thick with suspicion as leaders from across the globe stared at the masked man. He reached into his dimensional storage, pulling out a legendary hammer that once belonged to the Sun Knight. Richard Paulson, the leader of the Absolute Guild, stood up so quickly his chair toppled over. "The auction begins now," Sang-hyuk announced, his voice echoing with undeniable authority. The bidding war was brutal, with prices skyrocketing into the tens of billions in a matter of minutes. Lilith sat on a stool beside him, boredly eating an expensive ice cream cone amidst the chaos. By the end of the night, Sang-hyuk had not only amassed a fortune but also placed the world's strongest players in his debt. However, the auction was merely a distraction for his true purpose, identifying the hidden agents of Baal. A sudden report arrived from his scouts detailing a mysterious energy spike in the Japanese mountains. Edgar Gonzalez, the mad scientist from the game world, was beginning his horrific experiments in reality. Sang-hyuk looked at Lilith and his brother, knowing he could not leave them unprotected while he traveled. He spent the night fortifying the castle's defenses with legendary artifacts from his inventory. Even a max-level player felt the strain of managing the world's most dangerous assets. His old team of mercenaries began to arrive, answering the call of their former monarch. Butcher, the captain of the masked mercenaries, stood at the forefront with his massive cleaver. They were ready to bleed for him, just as they had in the Eternal World for 22 years. "We move to Japan at dawn," Sang-hyuk ordered, his presence filling the courtyard. Lilith tugged at his cloak, asking if there would be better ice cream in the neighboring country. He couldn't help but let out a dry chuckle at her misplaced priorities. As they boarded the private transport, a sense of impending doom settled over the group. Far away, the experiments of Gonzalez were nearing completion, birthing something that should not exist. Sang-hyuk watched the clouds, unaware that he was walking straight into a trap designed specifically for him. Suddenly, the aircraft's systems began to fail as they entered Japanese airspace. A massive creature with multiple heads tore through the clouds, heading directly for them. Sang-hyuk stood up and walked toward the cargo door, his sword humming with power. "I'll deal with this," he said, jumping out into the open sky without a parachute. As he fell, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure watching from a nearby skyscraper holding a black crystal. The shadow of the mysterious figure on the skyscraper lingered in Sang-hyuk's mind as he prepared for the next phase of his return. He knew that the emergence of monsters was only the beginning of a much larger global escalation. The first step was to reunite the masked mercenaries, the only warriors he could truly trust to face the coming storm. Butcher, the captain of the mercenaries, was the first to arrive, kneeling before his lord with unwavering devotion. Soon, the vice-captains Guillotine and Iceflower joined them, their eyes burning with the same fire they held in Eternal World. However, a new threat had emerged in Japan that required Sang-hyuk's immediate and personal intervention. The mad scientist Edgar Gonzalez was conducting horrific experiments, crossing human players with monster essence. Traveling to Tokyo, Sang-hyuk confronted the corrupt politicians who were shielding Gonzalez for their own gain. He gave the Japanese guild master Hagawa Ryota a 3-day ultimatum to deliver the scientist or face the consequences. To prove his power, Sang-hyuk artificially triggered an overflow in a nearby dungeon, flooding the streets with chimeras. Despite the chaos, he ensured the civilian casualties were non-existent by secretly using Lilith's dream magic to guide them to safety. When Gonzalez attempted to flee, Sang-hyuk cornered him in a remote mountain village, ending his experiments forever. Before dying, the scientist spoke of a new version of himself, a cryptic warning that Sang-hyuk did not take lightly. With the threat in Japan neutralized, Sang-hyuk returned to Korea to find a new phenomenon, the Steel Mountain Range. This dungeon was the primary source of divine metals like adamantium and mithril, essential for crafting top-tier gear. International guilds clamored for access, but Sang-hyuk asserted his total control over the territory. He explicitly banned the United Kingdom's guilds after their master, Michael, insulted his authority. To conquer the mountain, Sang-hyuk formed a temporary alliance with the American Sun Knight, Richard Paulson. The entry into the mountain was blocked by a thick, magical fog that disoriented even the strongest players. Using his eyes that see through lies, Sang-hyuk led the expedition through the labyrinthine paths without error. Suddenly, the first guardian of the mountain appeared, the Black Knight Golem. Sang-hyuk didn't hesitate, drawing his massive battle hammer to meet the golem's charge head-on. The shockwave from their collision shattered the surrounding rocks and sent lesser players flying. Noticing a crack in the golem's adamantium core, Sang-hyuk delivered a precision strike that detonated the construct. Rare materials spilled from the golem's remains, filling Sang-hyuk's dimensional inventory with priceless loot. Richard Polson watched in awe, realizing the gap between his power and the Monarch's was still vast. Sang-hyuk ordered the team to press forward toward the peaks, where the divine metals were most concentrated. High-altitude harpies made of living bronze descended from the clouds to harass the climbing party. Iceflower unleashed a massive blizzard spell, freezing the metallic monsters mid-air and sending them crashing to their doom. They finally reached the heart of the forge, a volcanic crater at the summit filled with molten divine metal. There, the final boss awaited, the Steel Dragon, a creature forged from the very metal they sought. The battle was a symphony of steel on steel as Sang-hyuk engaged the dragon in an aerial duel. Richard and the mercenaries provided cover fire, distracting the dragon with coordinated skill attacks. With a final, soul-piercing roar, Sang-hyuk drove his blade through the dragon's throat, severing its mana flow. As the beast fell, the mountain itself began to stabilize, its treasures now ripe for the taking. Sang-hyuk allowed his allies a small share of the metals, securing their loyalty for the inevitable war against Baal. He returned to his castle, knowing that he had finally built the foundation needed to protect Earth. His brother Sung-min was safe, his guild was reborn, and his power was undisputed. In the shadows, Lilith watched her master with a smile, knowing that her own journey was just beginning. The masked monarch stood at the window, watching the sunrise over a world he had saved, ready for whatever challenges the future held.